Let me go ahead and now introduce our speaker today, George Murphy, who is the National Technical Advisor for our club. George has been conducting seminars on Mercedes technical information for over 35 years now. He is a concourse judge. He served the club in various officers as well as the national treasurer in the past. He's retired from 30 years of engineering work in the nuclear industry and kind of brings a nuclear approach to automotive maintenance, which I think is just wonderful. He has a company called Performance Analysis Company in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and he makes available some items that you just can't get anyplace else. Take a look at their website to see the range of things that they offer. They're very interesting things, and it fills a really important need for our club. He's owned Mercedes that go back to 190 SLs and coupes and roadsters, and I think today he's driving a 2014 GLK 430. He works on his own cars, and as I said, he is the National Technical Director of MBCA, and he is a frequent contributor to the Star. So, you know, if we were in a live room, I'd ask you to join me in a round of applause welcoming him, but it's so great to have George with us today. And thank you, George, for taking your time to present this and prepare this presentation on pagodas. Turn this over to you, and of course I know we're going to have to get your slides up, but welcome and thank you for being with us today.
As asked for, we're going to go through the very popular 113 SLs. I don't have one. I've worked on a few of them, and I had to rely on the input from a lot of experts in this, and I'll be putting you in touch with those people as time permits, but or you can reach me if you want to get that. But anyway, we'll get started here. The history of these cars, there's some production numbers and how many were made and all that total in the U.S. And these cars are arguably as popular as the 107 SL that followed. There's not as many around anymore, but they are rather very enthusiastic owners. If you own one or contemplating buying one, you must join the Pagoda SL group, given there's so much information available there. I pulled a lot of mine off there. They're probably the best and most authoritative source of information for these cars. So don't hesitate to join this group. It's only $30 a year. You have a magazine that's quarterly, but the amount of technical information available at that site is astounding. So do plan on joining that group. They're a good group of people. We'll start with talking about the engine and drivetrain in these cars, and the things we look at. These things are getting old, so mostly they're rubber motor mounts, engine shock absorber, and the bushings, the transmission mount. They are adjustable. Say check and adjust 30,000. That's whenever you do any movement of the engine. Say install new motor mounts, check the transmission mount adjustment too, and timing chain stretch, guides, and tensioner are with an overhead cam engine. Always need to be looked at. Moving to the rear of the drive shaft, there's an intermediate bearing and support in these cars. They're supported in rubber. The bearing is, and of course can, with time, can wear out. There is a U joint in there, but the flex is big rubber disc that connects the transmission to the drive shaft and then the rear of the drive shaft to the differential. There's a U joint in these cars. It's just behind the intermediate bearing, and they generally don't fail, but you can sure test them by grabbing the shaft ahead and behind that and try to see if there's any free play in that U joint. If there is, of course, you can't replace it. It's just welded part of the shaft. You'll have to take the whole shaft out and have it set off the new one put in. These engines, is over a cam, I recommend a valve adjustment every 10,000 miles. Now, these cars aren't driven that much, so maybe you want to do it once a year or something like that. But just be aware that you want to do a valve adjustment. And another thing you want to do is before you do a compression test, you do the valve adjustment, because your compression test may be questionable if the valves aren't adjusted properly. So ignition system, spark plug wires, distributor caps, and rotors, they can all wear out in time. They get old. A lot of cars I've sold the Pertronics or the Crane breakerless ignition, and they greatly improve the reliability of the ignition system. But if you want to change over to these, that's fine. I have them available, or they're available on eBay and other places. They're easy to put in. I've got a picture of it coming up. Also use the correct spark plugs on these engines. It's the BP5ES. There's the gap. That comes right off, again, my information, a lot of it is coming off this website, so just be aware of that. This is a Pertronics, what it looks like. There's a disc, it's actually a ring you put in. It's got, well, in the case of this car, 6 magnets. And as they pass by this sensor, it gives a pulse out through these wires going to the coil. Very simple system, easy to install. That's what they look like, and if you're ever considering one, that they're easy to put in. Fuel injection system. Yeah, it's the one most monkeyed with mechanics and owners over the years. And here's a picture from Joe Alexander, one of our great experts in the system, that you can see all the linkage in this, and rods, and they're all adjustable. So people think, oh, I can mess with this and everything like that. And there's the worst way to get these cars working right is to monkey with this without knowing what you're doing. So again, on the SL113 site, Joe Alexander has a lot of information on this. This is just one of many things. I also have a 40-page presentation from Pete Lesser about the fuel injection. And if any of you want a copy of it, send me an email and I'll send it to you. It's very informative if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of these fuel injection pumps. So just be aware, though, that there are a lot of people monkeying with them. Early pumps have a dipstick. It's right here. Check the oil in them, and you can change the oil in it. You have to get some kind of suction pump to suck it out, but you can do that and fill it with the proper. I think it takes the same as engine oil. Now, one of the most troublesome devices on these is what's called, I call it a fuel injection thermostat. It adjusts the injection pump as the engine warms up. It has cooling hoses to it and everything else. And here it is here. These are the cooling hoses here. And the hot coolant affects this plunger here, and it adjusts this rod, which goes down into the fuel injection pump. So be aware, these are very hard to find. I understand there are, or at least the feelers available, and you can take them apart, clean them, and put a new, what they call a heat feeler in there. So this is generally the biggest culprit in these cars, either running well when they're cold, but not when they're hot, or run fine when hot, but not when cold, because that's the cause of the adjustment of the injection pump is due to temperature. Automatic transmissions, again, they're the same as the usual, 30 to 40,000 mile, change the fluid and filter. Be sure to drain the torque converter and the cooler if you want. And when you do that, you go to fill it up again. The book may say 5 or 6 quarts. You may have to add a little bit more because you drain the torque converter and the cooler. So just be aware of that, that's all. Manual transmissions, some of the cars have those. Biggest problem is the shift linkage bushings just wear out. There are bushings in the shift inside the car, so to speak. Also, the linkage underneath the car, right on the side of the transmission, can be out of adjustment. The manual transmissions also use automatic transmission fluid. That seems to be a mystery to some people, but the transmissions are so finely made, they just need that lighter weight oil in them. So, battery and alternator, the highest capacity battery available. I Optima brand AGM batteries. There are other brands now, but they're cleaner and they don't have any acid leaking out of them. And for cars that sit a long time, they won't go down. They won't self-discharge like lead acid batteries. So you might consider those. Of course, I know most of these SLs, they sit in a garage and just come out on nice days, so which is fine. But one of these type of batteries will give you a lot less problems. Also, a belts and tensioner, or the tension of the belt, I think it's done with the alternator adjustment on these cars. So the brushes, the alternator regulator has brushes that are replaceable. High mileage alternators, that's all they need is new brushes sometimes, rather than a whole new alternator, which can be hard to find for these cars. So keep that in mind. So the electrical system of the cars, is thankfully robust. It's just all wires. There's no SAMs or cans that you'll find in newer cars starting in '96 or actually earlier. So these devices can really fool you. So the wiring is straightforward. Biggest problems can be from fuses, they oxidize. Put new fuses in, or rotate them back and forth in the holder. Because when I sit in the car or sit in the, especially a humid climate, they'll get a little oxidation on the end of the fuses if they're still the Mercedes-Benz type fuses. So be aware of that. Some SLs have external fuses either in the engine compartment or in the car. So be aware of where they are for those. One of the most important cables in the car is the ground engine to frame cable. All these cars have had the engine pulled for overhaul and put back in. And there is a cable that connects the engine, or actually, usually they're on the bell housing of the transmission, to the chassis of the car. That completes the ground circuit for the battery. So make sure that's in place if you have any engine work on a car or electrical problems, because that ground isn't there. The battery seeks ground through the radio or something else. You can burn things up pretty bad. So that's very important cable. Make sure it's there and it's tight. Cooling system, I recommend a flush every 3 years, reverse flush through the heater. You just pull the hoses off and take your garden hose and flush backwards through it. It's pretty easy with these cars. Coolant, I recommend Mercedes-Benz brand antifreeze. It's better for the aluminum components. Don't use the cheap green stuff. And to check the condition of the antifreeze, the pH should be between 7 and 8. You can buy a pH meter off eBay or anywhere. And that's a good way to check the condition of your antifreeze or the coolant in the cars. So I like to use Redline water wetter. It improves the heat transfer from the metal to the coolant. In an older car like that, much less chance of overheating. I used it in my old MGA that I had. And water pump lubricant, same thing. The water pumps in Mercedes-Benz are very tiny. Designed the same as using nuclear power plants. It's a rotating carbon seal, but water pump lube prolongs the life of these seals. So keep that in mind. Power steering, again, service about 30,000. Change the filter and fluid in it. They all take automatic transmission fluid. You can use a flush when the engine's running, and you'll pump the old fluid out into a catch pan while you're adding new fluid to it. When everything is clear, turn it off and top it up, put a new filter in it. There's a steering damper on these cars, and from my experience, they're about 50,000 miles. They're pretty loose. So you can check them out, undo one end of it, and run it back and forth. If you feel a neutral spot which is loose, it's time to change it. They should be a constant pressure back and forth in that steering damper. It's like a long, skinny shock absorber attached to the drag link. So just be aware that they generally wear out, and your car handles much better with a new steering damper, assuming all the other joints in the steering are in good shape. Brake fluid. These cars should all have new hoses by now. They're good for about 15 to 20 years, in my experience. My 89 300E needed new hoses at one point, and it was 14 years old. Flush your brake fluid every 3 years. And I like to use either ATE Super Blue or Mercedes-Benz fluid. Don't use DOT5. That's the silicone, I think. DOT4 is all you need. And I like to alternate the fluid. So when I'm flushing the fluid, they're two different colors. The ATE Super Blue is blue, and the Mercedes-Benz Pentasyn fluid is yellow. So when you're flushing the thing, when the fluid running out of the bleed screw changes color, you know that the new fluid has reached that one and it's time to go to the other one. A pressure bleed is most effective on these cars. You can pump them with the pedal and all that, but I like a pressure bleeder. They're so much easier, and you don't have to be under the car while somebody else is sitting in and pumping the brake pedal for you. Don't use silicone fluid in these older cars. Here's the right reason. Silicone fluid will not absorb water. Oh, that's a good thing. Well, yeah, except the water then exists in little blobs, shall we say, and they will move or migrate down to the calipers and cause rust. So the regular brake fluid absorbs the water. That's why we change it every 2 years. But that way you don't get these blobs of water working their way down to the caliper and rusting the pistons in a big expensive problem there. Exhaust systems on these cars, pretty simple, as you can see. There are rubber donuts. There's one there, and there's a donuts there. Yeah, there's rubber donuts holding it. That's for noise isolation, of course. And I recommend you use those things, and the donuts wear out from heat and time, so put new ones on it. Mufflers. My trick I use with mufflers is, as in most Mercedes-Benz, the rearmost muffler kind of sits at an angle. The front of the muffler is lower than the back. So I drill a drain hole in the very bottom of the lowest point of the muffler. If you ever started your car on a cold morning, you watch water coming out the exhaust pipe. That's water that's accumulated in this muffler. And of course, it doesn't all go away. It sits there while you're driving it and parking it, and it sits there and it sits there, and then it rusts the muffler out. I was just under a 560 SL the other day, and exactly that thing. The rest of the muffler looked tight, but there was a rust from the water. So drill a hole or a drain hole. It's only 1/8 of an inch. If you have get your car inspected in some states, put a screw in that hole while you go through the inspection, so the inspector doesn't have a heart attack over holing your muffler. But a drain in the muffler really prolongs their life. We talked about the brackets and U-bolts. Make sure they're correct and correctly adjusted. And as in all the shop manuals I've read, Mercedes-Benz exhaust grows as it gets hot. It moves to the back. That's why everything is suspended in rubber. And if you install a new system, some people put stainless steel systems on it. Make sure that the system can move backwards a bit. You see this little rubber bumper here? That's supposed to rest here on this little strap when everything is hot. But when it's cold, the system may be back as much as 10 millimeters behind that little bumper. But when it gets hot, the system will grow, and then this little bumper here rests right there. So that's something to be aware of. The exhaust does grow to the back as it gets hot. And you want to accommodate that. Some of them, the stainless steel systems have no accommodation at all, and they'll tighten up or whatever, and you get a lot of harshness from the exhaust. So differential, that's that big rear box back there. Change fluid every 60,000 miles. Always open the fill plug first, so you can fill it after you've drained it. These gearboxes do have a vent because the heating and cooling cycles lets the air in and out. Of course, over time, that air is moisture and it gets in there, and that's why we want to change fluid about every 60,000 miles. And they use high port gear oil. I don't know of any 113 SLs that have positive traction. Somebody may correct me on that, but I've never heard of them having that. But this is a regular gear oil that you should use, though. But that's a good way to take care of the differentials. Lubrication plan. This is a page out of the shop, not the shop, the owner's manual. And just to show you that it's got nice photographs, little lines showing you all the things that need to be lubricated on these cars. There's lots of grease fittings on them. And again, these cars aren't driven that much. I would say once a year, go after the grease fittings and pump a little bit of grease into them just to renew the grease. Of course, if they're used often, probably every 5,000 miles or so, you'd want to give it a lubrication job. But this is a copy of the page from the owner's manual. It's generally available on the internet too, but the problem is the pictures aren't big enough. So here's some hidden ones that people forget about. There's a green point on all the drive shafts right here. That thing's in my way. Anyway, there's a grease point, I'm told, is on every SL. And the door hinges here. This takes a special grease gun. And again, that's called out in that website, SL113 website, where to buy it. I think somebody found it at one of the farm supply stores, but that's how you grease your door hinges, and they do need it on occasion. So those are a couple of places that really don't get a whole lot of attention, but be aware of them. Software, pardon me, rubber and plastic. There's some emission controls on the later cars. You're changing fuel hoses, use symmetric size so they fit nice and tight. That's back at the fuel pump and on the engine and everything else. If you get SAE sizes, sometimes you really have to crank down on the hose clamp, and that can cut the hose. Where if you use the correct clamps and the correct hoses, it won't do that. Same with coolant hoses. Use correct coolant hoses. I like to use the Mercedes-Benz brand. I forget, Jimmy or something like that. Clamps. And the reason why, if you look closely at the clamps, the sides of the metal clamp are curled upward a little bit. That's so when they're tightened, they don't cut the hose. You can buy the regular hose clamps, you see the screw type and everything else, and tighten enough over the years, they'll cut right through the rubber. So be aware of the clamps on these older cars, and your dealer can supply the correct size. And from Mercedes-Benz, they'll have the curled up on the edges. Very good. Window seals and moldings on these cars, very when they get old, if you get them supplied, great, they'll need replacing. Hard top, soft top seals, same thing. Long-term storage, never leave the soft top stored up in the well. When you store your car, you park it for the winter or whatever. Put the top up. It keeps it from oil shrinking, humidity and moisture condensing in there, moths maybe, who knows. But that keeps the soft top nice and stretched and easy to put up and down again. So always store your car with the soft top up. There's a latch cable. This is a mechanism. It's kind of a bad drawing, but there's a little handle. Those of you who own these cars know there's a handle and there's a cable that attaches to the latch, the back of the soft top. And if it gets stretched or broken, you can't unlatch it. Well, you can if you, did I say how to do that? No, I didn't. Let you lay a blanket over the trunk, and you can lay on the trunk with a screwdriver and reach down into the hole and push that latch out of the way to get it loose. But just be aware that's I get a lot of calls on this broken or stretched cable on the soft top, both on the SLs, the later SLs too, of course, and the 113s on occasion. So just be aware of that cable. If it's broken or it gets stretched, it's hard to unlatch that. Door, trunk lights, tail light seals, you know, that water into your car, you don't want that. Don't use Armor All on seals. There's another product called 303 Protectant. It's available at most marine stores. It's the same stuff it was developed for the Coast Guard to preserve their rubber rafts that are carried on the outside of the cutters. So 303 is good protectant for rubber, not for leather, but for rubber. Leather, there's a company called LeatherIQ, leatherique.com. They have wonderful information on their website about how to take care of leather, how to restore it, and they have also good preservatives. Shield from excessive heat. You want to park your leather seats out in the sun, same with the wood too. Keep it covered if you can. In extreme cold, moving, sitting on the seats, any plastic parts, be aware of. Wood trim in these cars, almost all of them, it's going to need work. There are some hobbyists, you know, they'll take it all out and they'll do a good job on it. But it's really do it right. There are plenty of information on the website of how to do it. There are several who advertise in the star companies who will do your wood trim, restore it. So a lot of people want the wood trim looking nice, and that's what you got to do. Climate control. The heater levers on these cars, they're always brittle from age and they break. You have to replace them. I used to have a lever kit called DuraLever, which you could replace it from inside the car through the slot. You didn't have to take everything apart to get to it. Unfortunately, the company that made those for me has gone out of business. I'm still trying to get them made. PelicanParts.com has OEM levers, but you know they'll require disassembly of the dash to get to them. But I see they have all four of them. They're the plastic and they're different colors and everything. Last I saw, they were still available. The hot water valve and the cables that lead to it, clean and lubricate those. Clean the water valve. You can get them out of the car and take it apart. There's O-rings in there, and it's a little brass drum. Want to clean them all up. That's especially if you acquire a car that you're having trouble with the cables and all that. Don't try to force them; you'll break things. They're tight because the cables need lubrication, or maybe the heater valve is stuck and needs good cleaning. Blower motors, the brushes will wear. If you want to oil the bearings, if you're going to get into it, use automatic transmission fluid on any electric motor or DC motor anyway. The reason why, if you don't use motor oil or something like that, that can eat through the insulation and the windings, but ATF will not. It's good lubricant for blower motor bearings. Brushes, I think they're available. I might have a few available if some of them need some. If you have air conditioning in the car, the receiver dryer, anytime it's over 5 or 6 years old, you want to change it out. That's the device that absorbs all the moisture out of the coolant, the Freon, and consider getting another one if you can find them. Air conditioning hose fittings, those are SAE US type hoses on these cars, SAE size. They're not metric. And of course, the compressor is usually it's a York compressor on these cars, and the fittings are all SAE hoses. Some people have converted over to the rotary compressors, the same thing. They're SAE size hoses, the fittings are them anyway. So rust is a big thing in these cars. Really problems, especially an older car that's been let out in the rain and everything else. Some people put full chrome fender trim on these cars. You can be sure they'll rust underneath the trim. Don't use it. There are drain holes in the doors and other places in the body, and those are called out in the SL113 technical manual that you can get to at the website. So be aware of those drain holes, keep them clean. Rear cargo areas, they can get rusted out. Some areas will hold water, drill a hole in it, so they'll drain if they get water in them. If you do drill a hole, take a brush, a little bit of primer, and prime the hole, but you want it plugged so that bare metal in the hole won't rust. But doors and fenders, same thing. Make sure the drain holes are open. On these SLs, if you put your hand in above the front tire, you'll feel the shelf up there. That'll accumulate a lot of dirt, moisture, and it does nasty things. I've seen some of these SLs rust clear through into the engine compartment from that area. So be aware that you want to clean that off if you have one, or if you're looking at a car to buy. Put your hands up there and see if that shelf is clean and tight. Another big problem is the rear trailing arm motor mounts. These things here, they attach to the body, and they'll rust around there sometimes. And it's a major repair work to have that redone. And you have to have new body panels put in there and everything else. But these are the things that connect the rear end to the car. So it's a good idea that they're good and solid. There's a bushing here at the top of this rod to be aware of, but and of course the shock absorbers. But that's something that you should be aware of and looking at. More rust. These are the cars get painted, and in these depressions around the wipers, they're supposed to drain. The 107 SLs have a drain hole in here. These cars, they drain through a special washer here. Be aware of the capability of that water to drain out of these depressions. If you wash your car, it shouldn't be sitting in there, because guess what? It gets into the wiper shaft, eventually corrodes it, and your wipers start to get noisy, and worse yet, they'll break things. So just be aware, these depressions should drain water, and make sure they're open. But like I said, cars get painted, everything gets plugged up, and people don't realize that they're supposed to have a hole or a drain. Part sources. Okay, here we go. Everybody calls me other parts. I'm only going to list 3 of them here, but there are many others listed in the technical manual on our website, the 113sl.org. But Mercedes-Benz Classic Center, there's your email address. You can inquire about parts. They're expensive, but they can have them. K&K up in Michigan, they make panels for these cars, repair panels. So they're a good source for major repair panels. And one of the best guys in the whole business, Bud's Benz, down in Atlanta, in Douglasville, I guess. I've been down a couple of times, and they're experts in these SLs, and they can sure round up a lot of parts. But that's just 3 sources. There are many others listed in the website in the technical manual. There's a whole page. It goes on and on for page after page, depending on what parts you're looking for. Some are listed in Germany, and some are US based. But if you need a rare part, if you go into that technical manual, that right page. Where's my pointer? There it is. But I'm open to questions now. Anybody want to discuss any of these items at this point?
George, there's a few questions in chat, so let me go down through them.
Sure.
First question was, what's the difference between R113 and W113? That was from 2.
Oh, R I think is Roadster, and W is Wagen in German, Wagen, W-A-G-E-N. I believe that's what they are. That's the only explanation I've ever seen. Is the R's Roadster, I guess, but so the SL 113s are R113 to Mercedes-Benz.
Okay, Larry Kin commented in the chat, I take the lube guide to my garage. He looks forward to an annual scavenger hunt. But Vic mentions, could you explain, or asks, can you explain how to adjust the cable for the rear boot cover?
I remember doing it on a 107 car. I think it's similar to 113. Is to take a little inspection of the mechanism, and I think there's a little sleeve that you can adjust, which essentially shortens the cable a little bit. So when you pull the latch, it'll fully release the latch. You just have to look at it and see. I'm pretty sure if you don't see an adjustment, just buy a new cable. That's all I could. But I know the 107s, I've adjusted them on a couple of cars, and
yeah, that was the first thing I had to do on my 107 when I took the top off. And you really do want to do it before you get yourself locked out of being able to operate things.
yeah, that's I've laid across the trunk on a few cars with a tiny screwdriver, get in there and get that latch. You don't want to scratch the paint or anything. That's why you put a blanket across the trunk.
Now, Greg Thorin asks, any thoughts on the air filter for the injection pump? How often should it be changed?
I would say, depending on dusty conditions and everything, but probably about 10,000 miles or so. I don't think there's anything given in the shop manuals. I looked around. You can buy them. They are available. And but it is a good maintenance item at 10,000 miles or so, depending on how dusty your conditions. You're out west driving more dusty than here in Tennessee or maybe Georgia. We don't get that much dust, but I think that's probably a good idea.
Okay. And I'll call attention to Mark Schephofer's note. He says if anyone has issues with the blower switch, which has been out of stock for about 15 years, he says he rebuilt his and is happy to share the details, including pictures. He's got a email address up, and we hope to be able to save the chats for you all so you can use that.
Yeah. Those switches are rebuildable. You get them apart and clean them up, and you can rebuild them. It's a nice part of the older cars like that. They don't have computers in them.
Chris Petulli asks, he says, Dexron 3 is difficult to find. What fluid should be used for the automatic transmission?
A Dexron 3E or whatever. As long as it's Dexron 4 is okay. Is there a Dexron 4? I think there is. As long as it's Dexron.
Okay.
So you don't have to have the 3. If you see a 3E, I think I've seen 3E. That's fine too. Or your dealer will have the correct fluid too. So the transmission.
And John Bernardi comments that don't forget that a fair number of parts are available through your actual dealer, who often give 10% off for MBCA members. So,
Some
nice.
Do, yes. Mm-hmm.
And there's a nice thank you in there for inspecting a light ivory 560 SL from Larry Taylor. From Vic asked, any special or unique suggestions for paint care?
Paint sealer?
Paint care of the paint.
Care. Well, depending on the paint. Originally, they were painted with the paint that's no longer used now, or maybe even legally used. I don't know. That would depend on the painting people that do the painting. But if you get a car that's got nice paint, you know what to do. It's just a good sealer of some kind, and take good care of it. Wipe off tree tap, bird droppings, and things like that. But there are a number of different waxes and sealants that can be used. And there's some new technology coming out. I've seen them advertised that what they call it. It's you rub it on everything else, but it's supposed to be pretty good stuff. I'm surprised my 2014 GLK, what was it, 5 years old, 6 years old? The paint still beads up on it, And I was reading it's a newer paint Mercedes-Benz used. So that's a good indication of the condition of the surface of the paint, is that watching the water bead up. I was surprised that my GLK is of course original factory paint, now has a sealant on it from the factory. But of course, the older SLs, many of them have been painted several times, so color changes and everything else. So again, you want a good sealant. There's a number of them on the market, and lots of people criticizing them or evaluating them. So do a little bit of research yourself to find out what's best.
Okay. From Jean-Marie Girardot, drive shafts are difficult to find. Is it okay to replace the U-joint?
The U-joint? Well, the U-joint on the SLs, on these all the Mercedes-Benz, are an integral part of the drive shaft. You cannot change it out without cutting off the old one and welding a new one. That's why you take the whole drive shaft out, send it off, and there are companies that put a new U-joint in and send it back to you. But they're an integral part of that rear shaft. So they're not like some cars, which there's a snap ring you take out and pull out the little caps and all that. Mercedes-Benz aren't like that.
Okay. From Chris Patulli, Mercedes-Benz coolant has been yellow for years. Now it is blue. Which one to use? Are both okay?
Well, both are probably okay. They're backward compatible. I think my GLK has yellow in it. I'm not sure, but we'll say on the back that's good for, but they're backward compatible. The main thing, you have aluminum parts in your cooling system, and you don't want to use that cheap green stuff. So Mercedes-Benz antifreeze, or there's a Xerox
X05.
Yeah, that's it. Couldn't get it. That's the same stuff. So,
yeah.
But do use Mercedes-Benz brand. And
yeah, I bought a couple of cars that had the wrong coolant in them, and I've bought a couple that have the wrong transmission fluid in them. So you have to pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah, I had a 6-cylinder 110 engine that the cylinder head was eaten out by the antifreeze. Had to get a new cylinder head.
Yeah, the wrong stuff. Okay, I know the answer to this one, but Howard Schuler asks, for winter storage, should the car be placed on mounts?
What was what?
For winter storage, should the car be placed on mounts?
You can if you want to.
I wouldn't.
Depending on the tires you have, they'll get a little flat.
Yeah.
But that flat goes away after you drive it.
Yeah, I was at a Porsche Club tech session one time, and that question was asked, and the answer for those cars was, if you let them sit up in the air with the suspension hanging down, the suspension bushings take a set in that position, which is not good for the car. And so I think the same
considered,
same guidance is probably good for Mercedes.
Because flattening of the tire, that'll go away after you drive it a little while. So if you let it sit a long enough time, and depending on the tire brand too, some tires flatten a lot easier than others. I don't know. Pirellis are bad.
Yeah. From Maddie Forbes, is it common to have a speedometer rebuild at 68,000 miles?
Shouldn't be done at 68,000 miles, but overseas speedometer can rebuild it if you think you need it. They're down in, they're listed in the list. They're really good at those old clocks and speedometers. But overseas is the way to go if you think you need it rebuild. Something you might do if you get behind the dash for whatever reason is a few drops of automatic transmission fluid on the bearing where the cable goes into the transmission or into the speedometer. Okay, a little lubrication on that bronze bushing probably prolong its life, because I notice higher mileage cars, cold weather, they'll squeak a little bit until they warm up, and that's lack of lubrication. So admittedly hard to do it, but if you have occasion to get behind the dash or pull the speedometer out, oil that bearing back there. It's, automatic transmission fluid is good.
Okay, from 2, does George's website's universal cup holder work on the Pagoda console, and will you have it back in stock?
Yeah, you can put them in the console there. When I had them, I can't find those anymore. But yeah, they'll work. The good idea is to take Velcro and put the Velcro, one piece Velcro down on in the box, and then on the bottom of the cup holder, and it'll sit there. But you can always take it out, and you don't drill any holes in your car or anything like that. They are kind of nice. If I find them again, I'll carry them, but they're made in Germany too, but I guess they're not made anymore. The dealers used to have them, but and they were the same thing in body or interior colors on the station wagons. The later 124 wagons had them. It's the same thing. And maybe just go online or go to parts catalog, Mercedes-Benz parts catalog, and you might see it there. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention the Mercedes-Benz online parts catalog is cost you $75 a year, but you can get parts for your 113 SL, identify the part and the part numbers. So be aware of that. That's a good deal. If you do your own work and but you're looking up parts, the Mercedes-Benz online parts catalog, it's epc.com. They take a credit card and you get a password and all that, but if you do get it, it's a little complex to learn. Once you learn it, it's pretty fast. And I've been using it for years, but it's worth the money if you want to find parts for your car, or identify a part, whatever.
Okay, from Roland Boucher, does the data card give any info on the original dealer for the car that can be used today to determine where the car was sold originally?
Yeah. Well, do they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's his question. He wants to know if the data card will tell you where the car was originally sold.
I don't know if it tells you where it's sold. I might have a code for what assembly line. Usually there's only one for the 113s. But as far as selling, no, that's not on the data card. This card comes with the car from Germany. They don't necessarily go in there and put in a number for the selling dealer. But I'm pretty sure the line, Stuttgart, probably wherever it was, is that's available on the card. If anybody has a card want to translate it, send me a copy of it. I have all those codes. Send you back, or just ask for the codes. I'll send you a list of all the codes, and you can decipher the thing for yourself.
Okay. Tom Huffman asked you to show your contact information again. I think we also put it in the chat log, which I think we'll probably be able to save and send out to everybody.
Yeah,
in the chat log.
Yeah.
That sl113.org is the one place to go to get everything you need for these cars. There's so much information available. Join it, $30 a year, and they're a collegial group of guys on there, and a lot of good information. But the technical manual is astounding, all the stuff that's in there for these cars. So do join that if you have one of these cars.
Okay. Larry Taylor asks, for cars that aren't driven many miles per year, how often should fluids such as ATF, power steering, and rear differential be changed?
Well, transmission, power steering, I'd go more on mileage. You know, if they're stored indoors and all that, like 5,000 miles or so, but I don't know how much, these cars aren't driven that much. So there's a point where, you know, normal cars driving 30 or 40,000 miles before you change the fluids. But these, I would say depending on use, once a year, every 5 years or something like that. But if you acquire one of these cars and you want to go through all the fluids, go through them all, as I said, then that way you've got all fresh fluids in the car, and your little book where you keep track all this stuff, you'll know how old it is. So.
Okay. Chris Patulli asks another question on transmission fluid. He says, is Dex/Merc mix okay? Which I'm sure means Dexron and Mercron mix okay.
I think Mercron is Dexron, I think, but read the bottle, it'll say on it what it is, but it's Dexron is what you want.
From Barry, what are the causes of or remedies for a noisy 4-speed gearbox?
Rebuild. Now, there are people who can rebuild them. It probably needs new bearings. If you do it yourself, it's not that complicated. I rebuilt a 4-speed out of a Mitsubishi pickup. You know, so I would say bearings, but you want to do a complete overhaul. You know, so there's a lot of little things in a 4-speed that can make noise. So I would go for an overhaul. But if it's a low mileage car, you might just try changing fluid. Maybe fresh fluid might quiet it down. ATF is what's called for in these cars. But if it's still noisy and a higher mileage, plan on taking it out and having it rebuilt or rebuild it yourself. Again, the Mercedes-Benz parts catalog show you all the parts you need.
Okay, any thoughts on quartz paint protection or paint protective films from Brian Terry?
I haven't tried. There's a lot of new ones on the market. And there's a lot of controversy, I guess, about what works the best. I've seen YouTube demonstrations of some of these products where they spray it, they apply it to one side of the car and watch the water beat up on the newly applied stuff compared to the old stuff. So research it yourself, which one you're considering. Look it up, Google it, and check. You probably see YouTube how to apply it. You also find ways why it's good, why it works so well. So there's different ones.
Okay, Mark Schweigerhofer asks, any leads on windshield wiper switches aside from forking over $3,000 to the MB Classic Center?
Yeah, I'd take it apart, try and rebuild it myself, or send it to somebody who might be able to rebuild it. Buzz-Benz may be able to help you out. But yeah, the production costs today to make some of these parts, and what are they going to make, 500 of them or something? Where way back in the 60s, when they were making these cars and ordering the parts, they ordered 30,000 of them. And so the economy of scale comes in. The switch is maybe $20 in 1968 dollars maybe, but today to go back and make that same switch, yeah, and maybe what, 500 of them, maybe 100 of them. It's no wonder it's expensive to reproduce, remanufacture part. You look at some of the parts on the Classic Center, and wow, they're pretty steep. But that's just the way things are. It's low production of today's costs compared to multiple or huge production back in the 60s.
Larry Kin mentions that when he stores his car, he puts the pressures up to like 40 psi, but he reminds us to lower the front pressure down to the mid-20s for standard driving because it gets kind of bumpy.
Yeah.
and two says, George, save me a cup holder when you get them in stock. Tony Rodriguez mentions after driving his 250 SL, he notices a heavy gasoline odor from inside the trunk, but he hasn't found any leaks. He asks for your thoughts.
Well, there is a fuel collection system back in there in the trunk, and if you pull some panels and look at it, there's hoses, and they just get old, and the gasoline fumes just permeate right out through the hoses. This is common in the later 107 SLs and the sedans even. Over time, those hoses that are hidden above the fuel tank in those cars, but in the trunk, replace those hoses, and if there's a fume collection canister back, I think the latest cars have it. Think about replacing it, or at least leak check it somehow. But those old hoses they'll just let the gas fumes right out through it. That's what you're smelling.
Herbert Cruz asks, is it advisable to upgrade the alternator for more amperage?
It was adequate for the accessories that were in the car when it was made. Now, if you're going to add a $1,000 stereo system, yeah, you're going to need more power. And you may want to consider upgrading if you can find one of the right size. But I think they were 40 amp or something like that. They're adequate for the radio and the headlights and the heater blower. Now, if you had air conditioning, if your car had air conditioning added, you may want to, the compressor takes some extra power, so we may want to consider upgrading. I think if you order a new one, it may even be at higher amperage anyway. So you might check it again, go to the SL113 website, look up alternators and stuff like that, what you want to do. But a base stock car, the alternator should be more than adequate. But high mileage, the brushes may be worn. Maybe you just need new brushes in it.
Kevin Bork asks, How can you determine where the slack comes from in the drivetrain? He says when decelerating, a clunk occurs in shifting from 3 to 2. Is this from the tranny or the differential?
Could be it's neither. It could be neither. It could be that rubber support for the intermediate bearing between the transmission and the differential. If that thing makes a little honking noise, that's it. Your drive shaft is moving up and down when you change. You could get noise out of the transmission. That means it needs a rebuild. And the differential, again, if it's worn to the extent that it's got a lot of free play, you'll get that also. But the first culprit is usually the rubber mount for the intermediate bearing. Right? It's just behind the transmission, about a foot or so behind it. Let's change that. You got to pull the shaft to do that. Drive shaft. By the way, if you do pull the drive shaft, the front shaft is keyed to the back shaft with a spline, and you'll have to separate them to put the new bearing on there. Make sure you match mark them because it is balanced from the factory like that. And if you don't match mark and get it wrong, putting it back together, you might get vibration. So any rotating device like that, always match mark the pieces so you put it back to exactly the same as it was.
Don Drabick asks, sometimes when putting the top up or down on my 280 SL, the lower section will get stuck in the well and can't come out without much effort and not cutting the top from the hatch hinge. Any guidance there?
Has the top been changed? I wonder if somebody put a new top on it and didn't get it quite right.
Hey, Don, go ahead. Don, go ahead and unmute and answer George's question.
But other than that, an original top, most of them are long gone, and they've had tops have been replaced. So depending on who replaced it and what they did, if it's not done correctly, the lower part can hang up trying to get it out of there. That means that back bar, there's a metal bar that goes around the base of the back. I think that's got adjustments on it. You can loosen the screws and adjust it in and out. But of course, that's going to put wrinkles in your top. So some of the top installers will push that back to get it nice and tight, but then it hangs up getting it out of the well. So just be aware of that can cause that problem, and you'll want to be aware of that.
Okay. Bill Villano asks, can the original carpet material be acquired from a supplier?
I think the Classic Center can get it for you very expensively. Some people will buy bulk carpeting that looks almost like what's in there and cut it and have it bound up, and it looks really nice when they get done. But again, it depends on what you're doing with your car. If it's a show car, you're going to get judged on originality. You probably want to search out original carpet that was in your car, because as I understand, there were different weaves available depending on the years and all that. So you want to get the correct weave for there's cut pile and there's loop pile and stuff like that. And so you want to get the right one for what your car is, if it's going to be judged, if people are that persnickety about it. So, but you can get new carpet sets. There are companies that make them, and as I understand, they look pretty nice. So,
okay, Raymond Inferitino asks about fuel. Do you prefer regular grade leaded gas? If not, then regular or premium with 10% ethanol?
I don't like to use ethanol at all in these older cars. The ET fuel can affect the fuel hoses and metal parts, especially if there's any aluminum alloy or what we call pot metal parts in the cooling system. They'll rot right through them. So try to avoid E10 fuel. If you cannot avoid it, there are additives from Stabil. That's the brand, Stabil, S-T-A-B-I-L. Any auto parts store has them. Use Stabil additive to offset the bad effects of ethanol fuel on our cars. They weren't designed to have ethanol, and if you use it exclusively, it's bad on the injection pump, fuel pumps, everything else. My MGA had a plastic fuel filter on one with see-through ones. The E10 fuel softened that to the extent I squeezed it and it just collapsed. So be aware the E10 is just not compatible with these cars, and get regular, if you can, find regular gasoline. There's a website you can go to, is pure-gas.org. And click what state you live in and list all the stations in your state that have non-ethanol fuel, real gas they call it, or pure gas. It's pure-gas, gas.org. Try that. But if you can't do that, use a stable additive to offset the bad effects of E10 fuel. You have to use it.
Okay. Ken Bork asks, what is the recommended valve setting? 3,000s and 7,000s or 4,000s and 8,000s? And are they for hot or cold engines?
I like to use a cold setting because who likes to try to set the valves on a hot engine, right? Besides, you got to take some stuff apart to get to it. By that time, the engine's down almost to room temperature. So always go with the cold settings. And that way you're right. 110 engines I used to do were same thing. By the time you got into them, they're cooled off anyway. So just use that. They list a warm setting, but how warm? You know, when the engine operates at 185 Fahrenheit, that's too hot to touch. You know, and but by the time you get it apart, get into the valves, they've cooled off a bit. So I'll do it in the morning when the car is cool, then use the cold settings.
Herbert Cruz asks, how can you determine if the W113 is running too rich?
Look at your exhaust pipe. It'll smell a little bit, but gas mileage is terrible. A well-tuned 113 engine should get up in the 20s someplace, low 20s. It is well-tuned and everything is right. You can use an O2 sensor, plug it into the exhaust pipe. That's a good way for tuning. And you can buy those or go to a shop that has it. I'd be glad to set it up for you. But don't let them monkey the linkage, change the fuel mixture, unless they know what they're doing or you know what you're doing. Excuse me.
From Chris Patulli, there is a black plastic container at the left rear fender in the trunk of my 280. Is that an early carbon filter for the fumes from the tank?
That's your fume collection thing. That's one of the things that can smell if it leaks, or the hoses that attach to it. If those hoses will leak the fumes. So you might gently pressure test it, see if it leaks. Maybe patch the leak with RTV or something. But the hoses, replace the hoses that could cause a gasoline odor. That's the system I'm talking about, the fume collection system.
Okay.
I think that was in the later 280s. It wasn't 230s. I don't think had it. I'm not sure, depending on year of manufacturer.
Ed Machusek asks, when I pulled my 230 SL out of storage, I noticed my temperature gauge goes to redline at idle on a warm engine, then drops to a normal reading when moving. Is this a forewarning of a water pump or thermostat issue?
I would check thermostat issue first, kind of sticky thermostat. Put a new one in there. They're not that expensive. Make sure your radiators, but if the engine's warmed up after everything is settled down, should operate around 180, 190 Fahrenheit. Or I don't know, is it metric gauge almost? 85 centigrade. So, but that tells me it's a sticky thermostat or something. The temperature gauge is up, and then it eventually drops down. That's okay. But rule of thumb in the owner's manuals is if the temperature gauge goes to the red area and stays there, then you better turn the engine off. But momentary won't hurt anything.
See, Jay Hickson mentions he bought a new OEM window wiper switch turn signal stock from Mercedes Classic for $488. He mentions it's not cheap, but it's also not $3,000. Yeah, things do change. And John Bernardi mentions the kickdown solenoid on top of the transmission might also be a problem, causing a clunk when slowing to a stop.
What part on the transmission?
He says kickdown solenoid on top of the transmission. Don't know.
Oh, kickdown solenoid.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's worthwhile to check it. There is one in the automatic transmissions.
Barry asks, how do you stop a leak from the differential boot?
Depending on how it's leaking. Now, some differentials you look at, they look like there's a stain around the pinion input shaft or the two output shaft, but not dripping on the floor. My rule of thumb, that stain is because maybe the vent is plugged. So the gearbox can't breathe. And so as it heats up, it'll force a minute amount of oil through the seal, just enough to stain the case, but not drip on the floor. Now, if it's dripping, that's going to call for a seal change out. You'll have to, get into put new seals in it, whether it's a pinion seal or the output shaft seals on each side of it. So depending on which one is leaking, but my rule of thumb is the stains, unless it's dripping, don't mess with it. But and the stains would call for changing or cleaning the vent. It's on the top of. It looks like a tall bolt on the top of the differential housing.
Okay, and Mike Hughes mentions his automatic transmission sometimes shifts straight from second to fourth. Other times it goes from second to third to fourth. What causes this?
It would depend on throttle position. I think there's a cable that transmits the throttle position to the transmission. Again, the tech manual has the adjustments for that. And rule of thumb is when your throttle is the engine turned off, that when your throttle is idle but the engine turned off, that cable should need neither pushing on it or pulling on it to attach it. If so, that's out of adjustment. But that adjustment is called out in the tech manual, and that's probably the problem, assuming the fluid and filter are up to date. Okay. The sticky fluid, old fluid, can cause a delay. Transmission gets lazy, shall we say. The fluid is old and dirty.
Okay, Ken Bork follows up on the valve adjustment question. What are the cold settings for the valves? And if you know that off the top of your head, I'll really be impressed.
I don't know that off the top of my head. I could look it up. It's in your owner's manual. But that's what it is. Whatever it calls for cold, you do it cold. And like I said, let the car sit overnight before you do it. Then for sure you use the cold settings, which is room temperature, what it is.
Okay. Well, it looks like I'm at to the end of the questions that are in the chat window. I will mention to everybody, take a look at the chat windows because there's a couple of comments that some of you will find useful in there too. But I've got a question for you that kind of popped into my mind as you were talking about the rear suspension. As you probably know, I don't have a Pagoda, but I've got a 300 SCL that has the same rear axle. And I've just noticed that I've got toe out on the rear wheels. Is there any way to adjust toe on the rear suspension of that car, or what could cause toe out?
I would look at the bushings that locate that the rear axle carrier. You got that big arm, and there's a bushing at the front, and it's connected to the axle carrier. I would look for free play there, and that's if your wheel is going to be out or in. That's where it's going to occur, because has assembled with brand new parts and bushings. They're just straight arrow. I've had several SLs up on my favorite wheel alignment guy. He check it right on. But we looked at there are bushings on there, may be worn, that may be or bent, maybe hit a bump and bend that arm or something like that.
There's another question that's popped in from Vic, and he says, any suggestions for preventing rust or for removing it when you see it?
Well, what I used on my MGA had surface rust, not rusted through, was POR 15, is it? It's black stuff. You don't get it on your hands. Use rubber gloves. POR 15, clean it off as best you can, and then put a coat of it on. It ends up black, it cures. And that's the best way to prevent it. And the trunk, like these cars have a rubber mat. Under that rubber mat, they'll get condensation. I recommend you take that rubber mat out, first of all, clean off any surface rust, put POR 15, and then use the rubber mat as a pattern for a breathable, what do they call it? What the floor mat's made out of? Breathable floor mats or breathable trunk mat. Rubber, it condenses, and this has been with Mercedes-Benz up into the 80s. They had a rubber mat back there, and underneath they'd always get that rust. And I had an SL did that. I just put in it was a 107 SL, but the same thing, a breathable rubber mat, and then a breathable mat. They put the rubber mat over it, but that lets air underneath there and prevent the rust. But if you want to prevent any further rust, paint it with POR 15. Did I get that name right? People know what it is. It's the best stuff.
Okay, Ken Bork asks, after a rebuilt engine, the engine now runs much hotter than the original. Any suggestions as to better cooling? The radiator has been recored.
Much higher?
Much hotter.
About the water pump. Hotter?
Mhm.
Oh, correct thermostat, I'm hoping. If the original water pump, something I've seen on some water pumps and engines that use that cheap green coolant is the impeller is worn. You can see where it's just worn away and it's not efficient as it should be. So a good new water pump, a good correct thermostat, if the radiator's been cleaned, good hoses, if that might a little bit, try water wetter. That'll help too. Reduce it'll improve the heat transfer from the engine to the coolant. So, but usually these engines should run about, so what is it, 185 Fahrenheit or so, 190. That's 80 C, something like that. Whatever, it's on the gauge there. So but there's a reason where they get hot.
Okay.
Bugs in the radiator.
Yeah, I was wondering if the foreign material exclusion things were removed when the engine was put back together, but you never know. I always worry about that when I do something like that. Okay, I don't see any more questions. This is kind of. Oh, here's one. Come on in.
Will an 8-blade fan fit on a 280 SL on a 113?
Well, the what?
8-blade fan.
If you can find one that fits, yeah. I think they're what, 4-bladed. A 4, or if you find a 6 or an 8 that'll fit, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're 6, yep.
I don't know of any offhand. And nobody has told me, hey, this fan works, but I think they normally, is there a 4-blade or I can't remember.
6, but I have an 8-blade. I found one and
Okay.
I reluctant to put it on. I just didn't know if it would would fit.
Main thing that it clears the
Right.
shroud and all that kind of stuff. That's the only thing you worry about. But I did that in my MGA. I put a better fan in and a shroud. That made a big difference in the MG, but I think the SLs have a shroud on them. So
One more question in chat. Any thoughts on Evans waterless coolant?
Edmunds coolant, what kind?
Evans waterless coolant is what he said.
Waterless. I don't know anything about it. I would check up on it, but what I know is compatibility at high temperatures with aluminum. That's the big thing that I would be concerned with. I would stick with the Mercedes-Benz brand or the Xerox, Xerox, the correct stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there. People make all kinds of claims about them, but unless Mercedes-Benz has tested them and said they're compatible with your engine, I wouldn't use it at this point.
Okay, well, we have no more questions in chat. Anybody else have a question before we come to a conclusion of this session?
This is Ken Burke. May I make a suggestion?
Well, sure.
One of the fellows complained that his car shifted from 2 to 4, bypassing 3. Well, I've had that problem and I've tried everything. And believe it or not, I cured it by checking the vacuum, make sure all the vacuum lines are right, because that affects the vacuum solenoid on the side of the transmission. If the vacuum is not working right, it's not at the right speed, you'll jump from 2 to 4, because that's what determines whether the gears are, whether that particular gear is held in longer based on the position of the gas pedal. It's the vacuum that determines that, not the position of the gas pedal. So check your vacuum lines, make sure there's no vacuum leaks. And that's what I did. And then my transmission shifted very well after that.
Yeah, good point. That's true in later transmissions too. But these older cars, that vacuum source, make sure it's good, clean hoses, and plan on changing them. But worst case, you have to change the vacuum actuator. But that's a good point.
Any other questions? Going once? Going twice?
I'd like to reiterate, anybody has questions, send them to me. My email's at the end of the thing there. And I'll be glad to refer you to do join the sl113.org website, join that. answer every question you could possibly have, I think, on that website. It's there. And they have a nice technical manual you can download and print it out for yourself. It's wonderful. So that's really the place to go. There's a lot of good experts on that. Know much more than I do, but there's good people on there.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you, George, for a really informative and interesting session. And thanks everybody for participating in their questions and the answers. We are going to be posting this on our MBCA PeachTube YouTube channel in a few days. And I just recommend you follow our MBCA PeachTube YouTube channel. We've got 43 videos up there now, including a number of these type presentations by George. We also have a Facebook group. If you want to follow what we're doing, join our Facebook group. And of course, all our events are up on our website, mbcapeachtree.com, so that you can see what we're doing in the future. And we'll intend to have a few more of these type things. We're going to do a survey afterwards. And one of the things we try to get from you in the survey is what things you'd like to see in the future. We certainly want to continue to do this type of event. George is a wonderful presenter and he has such a wealth of information. But as he said too, he'll answer your questions. Send him an email. I've seen him do that. He just comes back with the precise technical information and usually the workshop manual pages. So he's a wonderful resource for our club. So I commend you to use him. And I, again, thank you, George, for taking the time with us this morning.
Oh, it's fun to do. I enjoy doing it.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll sign off then.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.